Some stories are told to put you to sleep, and some are told to wake you up. The story I am about to share with you belongs to the second kind. It doesn't begin with a clap of thunder or a prophecy booming from the heavens. It begins with a silence, a heavy, thirsty silence stretched across a land that had long forgotten the taste of hope. A silence in the hearts of a people who had learned to walk with their heads bowed, to study the dust at their feet, because to look up was to see only an endless, indifferent ski I should know. I was one of them. My name is Malik, and this is my confession, my testimony of the woman who came not to perform miracles, but to remind us of the miracle we had forgotten within ourselves. This is not the story of a savior who descended to rescue us. It is the story of how we, in the midst of our own despair, learned to rescue ourselves through the words of a stranger. It has everything: betrayal that cuts deeper than any knife, conflicts that rage in public squares and in the quiet chambers of the heart, a love that transcends blood, and a final shattering twist that will redefine everything you think you know about power, faith, and what it truly means to be free. I promise you the ending is not what you think it is. And before we begin this journey together, let me know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Drop a comment below so I know that tonight, in this silence, we are not alone. Our land was a crack in the desert, a parcel of existence seemingly abandoned by God. Dust was more common on our lips than prayer. The sun was not a source of life. It was a warden, a relentless tormentor that baked the earth into a mosaic of fissures and leached the very color from our lives. We lived under the shadow of the Council of Elders, somber men in immaculate robes who governed by laws carved in stone, their hearts seemingly chiseled from the same cold material. At their head was the High Elder, Caius, a man with eyes as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass, who saw weakness as a farmer sees a weed, something to be uprooted with ruthless efficiency. He ruled not with a sword, but with shame, with the ever-present fear of a divine retribution that he alone was qualified to interpret. Hope, for us, was a forgotten myth, a fairy tale that mothers no longer bothered to tell their children. They taught the lullaby of endurance instead. Yet even in the most barren soil, a mad seed will sometimes try to sprout. That seed was a man named Kail. He was an ascetic, a wild man who lived in the caves at the edge of the wastes, his skin the color of burnt leather, his hair a tangled thicket of defiance. Every few days he would stumble to the edge of the marketplace, not to beg for bread, but to scream. "Make way! Unblock your ears!" he would rasp, spittle flying from his lips. "An echo is coming, not the roar of a lion, not the fury of a storm, but an echo that will shake the very foundations of your soul." People would toss him a pitying glance, perhaps a crust of stale bread, and then hurry on. They called him Kail the Madman. I confess I thought him mad as well. But there was a sliver of terrifying clarity in his madness, a conviction that I couldn't entirely dismiss. My brother, Reese, was different. 5 years my senior, with shoulders broadened by the plow and hands calloused by the sword hilt, Reese was the embodiment of our people's simmering rage. "An echo?" he scoffed one evening as we sat by a meager fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls of our small home. "You listen to the ramblings of a starving lunatic, Malik. The only thing the council and their lapdogs understand is the song of steel. The only thing that can cleanse this land is their blood. Freedom is not given, it is taken by force." I loved my brother. I understood the fire in his belly because its embers glowed in my own, but I feared it. I had seen where his path led. The small rebellions he and his comrades instigated always ended the same way, with more crosses silhouetted against the sunset, more mothers weeping, more silence. Trapped between Kail's unhinged prophecies and Reese's bloody certainty, I felt adrift, A man walking down a corridor with no doors. I yearned for something else, a third way, but I could not even imagine what it might look like. And then she came. Her arrival was not an event. It was a shift in the atmosphere. It happened at a wedding in the small, dusty village of Bethany, one of those rare occasions where joy was rationed out like water. I was there not as a guest, but as a wanderer drawn by the thin, reedy sound of a flute. I saw her in a quiet corner, as still as a shadow. She was not beautiful in the way of queens, but there was a profound peace about her, a centeredness that seemed to bend the frantic energy of the world around her into a gentle curve. Her name, I would learn, was Elara. The celebration was in full swing when the disaster struck. The wine, the cheap, sour liquid that fueled the brief happiness of my people, ran out. I saw the groom's face drain of color, the shame spreading through the small courtyard faster than any rumor. The party was dying. The music faltered. It was then that Elara stood up. She didn't walk towards the empty clay jars. She walked into the center of the courtyard, into the heart of the awkward silence. She didn't speak of wine. She began to tell a story. It was a simple tale about an old father sharing his last piece of bread with his children during a harsh winter. He didn't divide it equally. He gave the largest piece to the weakest child, a smaller piece to the strongest, and none for himself. When his children asked why, he had simply said, "My joy is not in the bread I eat, but in the sight of your hunger being sated." Her voice was low and melodic, not commanding but inviting. As she spoke, I saw the host of the feast, who had been frantic moments before, look at his wife and share a small, knowing smile. I saw guests begin to talk to one another again, not about the lack of wine, but about their own stories, their own small acts of sharing. A man pulled a dried fig from his pocket and gave it to a child nearby. A woman poured the last of the water from her personal flask for an old man. No physical miracle occurred. The jars remained empty, but the air had changed. It was now filled with something far more intoxicating than wine. Connection, empathy. Laughter returned, richer and more genuine than before. The celebration was saved. I stood frozen, a spectator to a miracle I couldn't explain. I had come expecting nothing, but I had witnessed everything. It wasn't the power to change matter, it was the power to change hearts. A power as subtle and as irresistible as a root splitting a stone. In that moment, I knew. The echo Kyle had screamed about wasn't a sound. It was a person. And I, Malik, the cynic, the lost one, decided to do the most irrational thing of my life. I decided I would follow that echo, no matter where it led. Our journey began in earnest then, and it led us inevitably toward the seat of power, into the very den of the High Elder, Caius. Elara, armed with nothing but her stillness, was about to walk into the storm. She arrived in the capital on a market day. The great central plaza was a theater of controlled chaos, a swirling vortex of commerce and desperation. The air was thick with the scent of livestock, spices, and the metallic tang of injustice. Money changers, their services sanctioned and protected by the council's guards, sat behind heavy wooden tables, their scales seeming to weigh not just coins, but the souls of the desperate farmers who came to them. Merchants selling sacrificial doves and lambs hawked their wares at inflated prices, turning an act of faith into a transaction of greed. I was one of them. I expected Elara to be angry. I braced myself for a righteous fury, for the symbolic, violent act of overturning those tables. Reese would have done it without a second thought, but Elara did something far more unnerving. She walked to the very center of that maelstrom of human activity, and she simply stood there, silent. Her silence had a peculiar gravity. It was a pool of stillness in a rushing river. Slowly, the noise around her seemed to diminish. A money changer paused mid-count. A farmer lowered the cage of doves he was about to sell. One by one, people turned to look at the lone woman who stood so placidly in their midst. When she had their attention, she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the din like a honed blade. And before we begin this journey together, she questioned, let me know, where to a merchant selling doves, she asked, what time is it for what is the price of a soul's prayer so that you weigh it in silver? The man froze, his mouth half open. She turned to a guard, his hand resting arrogantly on his spear. Was your weapon forged to protect the people or to protect the systems that bleed them dry? The guard shifted, his confidence wavering, his hand twitching on the spear shaft. Finally, she lifted her gaze to the great carved balcony of the temple, where I knew Caius and the other elders often observed the city. Her voice rose, clear and resonant. You teach that the most sacred temple is the one built of stone, but I say to you that the most sacred temple is the human heart. Why then have you allowed its courtyard to become a marketplace of fear? You teach of a God who loves truth. Yet you build your power on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. So I ask you, who is it that you truly worship? A profound, deathly hush fell over the plaza. Someone had finally given voice to the truth that everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. Her questions were like keys, unlocking invisible cages in the minds of the people. I saw it in the way the farmers straightened their backs, in the flicker of something other than despair in their eyes. For the first time, they were not just a crowd, they were individuals, united in a moment of shared recognition. High on the balcony, I saw a flash of white robes as a figure turned abruptly and disappeared inside. I didn't need to see his face, it was Caius. Elara was no longer an anonymous wanderer, she had declared herself. She was now a problem, a threat to the meticulously crafted order he had spent a lifetime maintaining. The game had changed. This was no longer a journey of faith. It was a war of ideas, and that plaza was the first battlefield. I knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones that from that moment on, every step we took would be shadowed. Danger was no longer a possibility, it was a promise. Word of Elara spread not like a wildfire, but more like the wind, unseen but felt everywhere. Some called her a prophetess, others a seditionist, but no one could ignore her. The night after the confrontation in the plaza, as we sat in the common room of a run-down inn, there was a quiet knock on our door. It was Valerius, a senior member of the council, a man whose reputation for intellect and a measure of integrity set him apart from his peers. He came cloaked and hooded, a thief in the night, stealing a moment with the woman who threatened his world. I must know, Valerius began, his voice a strained whisper after he had assured himself that only Elara and I were present. His usual composure was gone, replaced by a raw urgency. This power you have, where does it come from? Are you the one the prophecies speak of? Are you here to establish a new kingdom? Elara calmly poured him a cup of herbal tea, her steady hands a stark contrast to his trembling ones. The kingdom you speak of, Valerius, what is it built with? Swords and statutes? With the power of God, Valerius stammered, the well-rehearsed answer sounding hollow even to his own ears. Elara's smile was gentle but tinged with a deep sadness. For centuries, men have looked for power outside of themselves. They scan the heavens for a sign, plead for a hand to reach down and save them, all while forgetting the strength in their own two hands. They beg for a guiding light, failing to see that the sun has always resided within their own hearts, merely obscured by the clouds of fear and dogma. She looked directly at Valerius, her gaze both compassionate and piercing. I have not come to build a kingdom of stone, Elder. I have come to remind people of the kingdom that already exists within them. People do not need to be saved. They need to be awakened. This new birth you have read about and puzzled over, it is not a miracle bestowed from on high. It is a choice to shed the heavy cloak of what others say you are and to finally stand naked and free in the truth of who you are. Valerius sat in stunned silence, her words dissolving the foundations of his structured world. In the corner of the room, I felt my own walls crumbling. Her philosophy was so simple, yet so radical. It shifted the burden of salvation from the heavens to the human heart. But just as this profound quiet settled in the room, it was broken. A street urchin, paid a few coins to be a messenger, slipped into the inn and pressed a small, folded piece of parchment into my hand. It was Reese's handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unfolded it. The script was crude, but the words burned with intensity. Malik, stop following that dreamer. Tomorrow night we strike the council's grain store at Jericho. A real blow, not just words. Come, be a man, fight with us. I clenched the parchment in my fist. It felt like a hot coal. The small room suddenly felt suffocating. On one side was Elara's quiet whisper of an inner light. On the other, my brother's roaring fire of revolution. One path demanded infinite patience. The other promised immediate, bloody results. One built from within, the other destroyed from without. I was torn in two. Elara was forging a new path for our people, but I was standing at a violent crossroads in my own life, and I had no idea which way to turn. My decision was not made by logic, but by a journey we took a few days later, a journey that would change everything. Elara, against all advice, decided we would travel north, through Samaria. To any of my people, this was an act of deliberate provocation. The feud between Judeans and Samaritans was ancient and bitter. We saw them as half-breeds, their faith a corruption, their very existence an insult to our purity. To travel through their land was to invite scorn, hostility, and perhaps violence. But Elara went. We arrived at a town called Sychar at high noon, the sun at its most punishing. Exhausted and parched, we stopped at an ancient well, said to have been dug by the patriarch Jacob himself. Elara sat on the low stone wall encircling the well, while the others, visibly uneasy, went into the town to procure food. I stayed with her, the weight of Reese's summons still heavy in my soul. Some stories are told to a Samaritan woman approached the well, a clay jar balanced on her shoulder. To wake you up. She moved with a furtive quality. I am about to share with you on the ground, to the as if she were trying to make herself invisible. It doesn't begin with a clap of thunder or a prophecy booming from the heavens. The ones who came for water in the oppressive heat of midday, a heavy, thirsty silence stretched across a land venomous whispers of the respectable women who gathered at the cooler times in the hearts of a people who had learned to walk with their heads bowed. Give me a drink? To study the dust. Elara's voice was soft, because to look up shimmering was to see only an endless. The woman started, her head snapping up. Seeing Elara, a Judean, addressing her, she recoiled, her face a mask of suspicion. You are a Judean, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? Your people won't even use a cup that our lips have touched. I expected Elara to lecture her on tolerance. She did not. Instead, she looked at the woman with an empathy so profound, it was almost tangible. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman let out a short, harsh laugh. You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself? Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, Elara replied, her tone gentle. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Where in the world are you? The water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. I know that tonight the sarcasm on the woman's face faded, replaced by a flicker of intrigued disbelief. Sir, she said, a challenge in her voice, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. Elara did not answer directly. She shifted her focus. Go, call your husband and come back. A wall slammed down. The woman's face hardened. I have no husband. "You have spoken correctly," Elara said, her voice devoid of judgment. "The truth is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. I do not say this to condemn you. I say this because I see you, Leah. I see the burden you carry. I see the thirst for love and acceptance that has led you from one man to the next, each one leaving you emptier than the last." For the first time, Elara used her name, Leah, not the Samaritan woman, not the sinner, just Leah. Tears welled in the woman's eyes, tracing clean paths through the dust on her sun-beaten cheeks. The armor she had worn for a lifetime, an armor of defiance and shame, cracked and fell away. In Elara's gaze, she did not see a Judean judging her, but a stranger seeing her, completely and with a devastating compassion. How did you know?" she whispered. "The water I speak of is this very truth, Leah," Elara continued softly. "The truth that your worth is not defined by the man who claims you. It is not found in this well or on that mountain where your people worship, or in Jerusalem where my people worship. It is found right here." Elara gestured toward Leah's heart. "The water they deny you does not matter compared to the spring of self-worth you can find within yourself." Leah crumpled to the ground, weeping, not the tears of shame but the tears of release. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. After a moment, she rose, wiping her face. She left her heavy water jar by the side of the well. She no longer needed it. She ran back toward the town, not furtively this time, but with a newfound freedom in her step. She ran straight to the market square and cried out to everyone, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. He did not judge me. He saw me." Her testimony had a strange power. The villagers, always hostile to outsiders, were moved by the transformation in the woman they had always scorned. They came out to the well, a curious, hesitant crowd. They looked at Elara and then at Leah, who now stood tall, her face radiant. Something had shifted. And I, Malik, who had witnessed it all, had my answer. I quietly took the crumpled parchment from my pocket, the one bearing my brother's fiery summons, and let it fall from my fingers, to be buried in the ancient dust. Violence could destroy a village, but it could never heal a soul the way Elara just had. My path was clear. Elara's influence had reached its zenith. A great tide of humanity now followed us, no longer counted in dozens or hundreds, but in thousands. They were farmers and craftsmen, outcasts and seekers, all drawn by the fragile flame of a new kind of hope. They followed her up a wide, barren hill, a place as starved for life as their own souls. As the sun beat down from its highest point, a new, more primal need arose: hunger. The murmur of hungry children and anxious parents began to ripple through the crowd. They had hope, but they had no bread. I saw the other disciples begin to panic. "Master," one named Philip said, his voice strained, "how can we possibly feed so many? A year's wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." This was the moment the crowd had been waiting for. A miracle. They looked at Elara with eager, upturned faces, expecting her to turn stones into loaves, to summon manna from the sky. I held my breath with them. But Elara, once again, defied every expectation. She turned to the vast assembly and said, "I have no bread for you, but I believe that we have enough." She gestured to a young boy sitting near the front, clutching a small cloth bundle. "What do you have there, child?" The boy nervously opened his bag. Inside were 5 small barley loaves and 2 small dried fish, barely enough for himself. Elara smiled at him. "Are you willing to share?" The boy looked from Elara's kind face to the sea of hungry people. He hesitated for only a second before nodding. Elara took the small bag, held it up for all to see, and declared, "Look, the miracle has already begun." She then turned to those nearest her. "And what about you? What is in your satchels? An olive, a piece of cheese, a handful of dates? Do not hoard it. Look at the person next to you. Their hunger is your hunger. Their need is your need. She broke a tiny piece from the boy's loaf and handed it to the person beside her. That single, simple act ignited a chain reaction. A man shamefacedly pulled out a hidden onion. A woman produced a small flask of goat's milk. One by one, inspired by the generosity of others, people began to open their bags and share their meager provisions. They passed food to strangers. They bartered. They laughed. A communal feast was born from nothing, from a collective act of trust. Soon everyone had eaten, and there was more than enough. The mood was electric. Jubilation erupted. They cheered for Elara. This is our true leader, the one who can provide for the people. They were ready to crown her their queen, to carry her on their shoulders. But at the very peak of her glory, at the apex of their adoration, Elara drenched their celebration in ice water. She stood upon a high rock, and when the crowd had fallen silent, she delivered the most shocking and divisive sermon of her life. "You have eaten your fill, and for that I am glad," she began. "But you did not follow me up this hill for barley loaves, did you? You came because you hunger for something else, a deeper hunger, a hunger for meaning, for deliverance. You have eaten today, but you will be hungry again tomorrow. The true bread, the bread that can truly sustain you, is not made of wheat. It is made of truth." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And here is the hardest truth of all," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, clear edge. "You must digest the fact that the power is not in me. The miracle did not come from my hands. It came from the heart of that boy, from the willingness in all of you. You must stop looking for a savior outside of yourselves. You must stop surrendering your power to a leader, whether it is me or the High Elder Caius. I am not your answer. I am only a question, and the answer lies within you. You must become your own light. You must be the bread for one another. Do not follow me. Walk with each other." Her words were a dagger to the heart of their fantasy. I saw the faces in the crowd transform. Adoration turned to confusion, then to disappointment, and finally to anger. "What is this?" a man shouted. "We need a leader, not a philosophy lesson." "She is rejecting us," another cried. They wanted a Messiah to carry their burdens. They did not want that burden handed back to them. Then from the edge of the crowd, a familiar voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs. "You see, I told you." It was Reese, my brother. He strode forward, his eyes blazing, and pointed an accusing finger at Elara. "There is your savior, Malik, a purveyor of pleasant dreams. She takes away their hunger, but she also takes away their rage. She wants us to meditate while our enemies sharpen their swords. Elara, you are not hope. You are an opiate." The public confrontation between Reese and Elara, between revolution and awakening, was the spark that ignited the schism. The crowd fractured. One part, disillusioned, simply walked away. Another, inflamed by Reese's words, now looked at Elara with open hostility. Only a small, bewildered group remained. That was our lowest point. The hill of hope had become a valley of brokenness. It begins with Elara, once adored, was suddenly isolated, and I, standing between the teacher I believed in and the brother I loved, felt my own heart of a people who had learned to walk. The path ahead, once so promising, was now shrouded in a darkness more profound than any I had ever known. And endless. After the shattering on the hill, a palpable fragility settled over us. The great crowds were gone. We were a remnant, a small band whose faith had been tested by fire and had not, for reasons I was still trying to understand, turned to ash. Elara herself seemed undeterred, but I saw in her eyes a deep sorrow, not for herself, but for those who had turned away from their own power. It was during these bleak days that she performed what I now consider her most symbolic act, more profound than the miracle of the shared bread. As we passed through a gate into Jerusalem, we came upon a blind beggar. He had sat there since childhood, his existence a fixture of the city's landscape. landscape of pity and disgust. He wasn't just physically blind. He was blind to hope. People would toss a coin into his bowl as a toll for their own clear conscience. Where in the world are you listening from? Of his parents, what time is it for you? Failing in Drop a comment below, so I know that tonight, as the council's doctrine taught, we are not a living monument to God's judgment. Even my fellow disciples asked Elara a version of the same question, though with more compassion. Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Elara looked at the beggar, who flinched under the sudden attention. Then she spoke, her voice carrying to the passers-by. It was not that this man sinned, or his parents. He was born this way so that the works of truth could be revealed in him. She performed no grand ritual. She did not anoint his eyes with oil or chant a holy verse. She simply sat down beside him on the filthy ground. It was a small gesture, but it sent a shockwave through those who saw it. No one of sound body ever sat down beside the beggar. "What is your name?" she asked. The man was startled. It had been years since anyone had asked for his name. He was simply the blind one. "Seth," he mumbled. "Seth," Elara repeated, as if the name itself were beautiful. "Before the darkness came to your eyes, what did you dream of seeing?" The question was astonishing. No one asks a blind man what he sees. Seth was silent for a long time. Then he began to speak. He spoke of childhood memories, of the color green of his mother's face. His voice, at first a weak tremor, grew stronger as he unearthed these buried treasures. He was reclaiming a part of himself that had been entombed under decades of shame. Elara listened, her attention absolute. When he finished, she said, "They say you are blind because you are a sinner. A punishment, but I see something else. I see a man with a memory of light, a sensitive soul, and a strength of endurance that none of these people who stare at us could possibly comprehend. They can see the sun, Seth, but you have seen things that eyes cannot." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your eyes may not be healed today, but your spirit can be. Do not let their definition of you become your truth. Stand up, Seth. Not as a beggar, but as a survivor. Use your story, use your darkness to show them a different kind of light." And then the true miracle happened. Seth slowly, unsteadily got to his feet. He was no longer hunched over. He lifted his head, turning his sightless eyes toward the crowd. For the first time, he wanted them to see him. "I am Seth," he declared, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, no longer the whine of a beggar. "I have lived my entire life in darkness, but today a woman has shown me that even in the dark there can be dignity. You give me coins, but she gave me back my name. You see a punishment, but she saw a person. So tell me," he challenged the stunned onlookers, "who among us is truly blind?" The crowd was speechless. The words of this man, this fixture they had always considered less than human, carried the weight of a verdict. He was still blind, but he could see. He had not been healed. He had healed himself by embracing the truth of his own worth. He became a living testament to Elara's philosophy, a quiet but resounding victory in our darkest hour. After the incident with Seth, the council could no longer afford to be patient. A blind man finding his voice was more dangerous than a crowd being fed. Their pursuit of Elara intensified. We became true fugitives, moving through shadowed alleys, hiding in the homes of sympathizers who trembled every time a guard patrol passed their door. One cold night, huddled for warmth in a disused sheepfold, Elara gathered our small, loyal group. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows on our weary faces. "The wolves are coming," she said, her voice calm, "and they are not coming for the sheep, they are coming for the shepherd." She looked at each of us in turn. The council, they are like hired hands. They tend the flock for their own benefit, for the wool and the meat. When a true wolf appears, a real threat, they will be the first to flee, leaving the sheep to be scattered and torn. They protect the law, not the people. She paused, her gaze impossibly deep. Am the true shepherd, and a true shepherd is willing to face the wolves, to lay down her life for her flock. Anxiety rippled through our group. What should we do? Will we fight? One of them asked. No, Elara said firmly. Our weapon is not the sword. It is the truth. I will not abandon you, but I will not fight for you either. I will walk ahead. I will draw the attention of the wolves. I will show you the way to safety. But after that, it is up to you to care for one another, to keep the flock together. Her words were both a comfort and a farewell. We all understood. The final confrontation was inevitable. I couldn't sleep that night. I walked out under the vast, star-dusted sky. I finally understood Elara's path completely. It was the harder path. It demanded not obedience, but maturity. I knew I had to see Rhys one last time. I found him in his usual haunt, a rough tavern on the city's outskirts where the resistance fighters gathered. He was polishing his sword, his face grim in the sputtering lamplight. "Have you come to mock me?" he asked without looking up. "No," I said. "I've come to say goodbye." He stilled, finally meeting my gaze. "Goodbye? Are you going to follow that woman to your death?" "You're wrong, Rhys," I said, my voice steadier than I had ever felt it. "Your violence only creates more ashes. You kill a guard, and they send 10 more. You burn a grain store, and they tax the villagers into starvation. You are fighting the symptoms." "And your teacher? She's telling fairy tales?" he snarled. "No, she is teaching us how to grow something new from those ashes. You want to liberate the land. She wants to liberate the people who live on it. There's a difference, and I have chosen my path." I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, but this time it was mixed with something else, something that looked like loss. He had lost the little brother who had always looked up to him. We were no longer on the same side of any war. "Then go," he said, his voice husky. "But when your pretty ideals are crushed under the boot of the council, don't come crawling back to me." I nodded, a profound sadness settling in my chest. "Goodbye, brother." I turned and walked away, leaving him to his sword and me to my conviction. The greatest personal conflict of my life had been resolved. I was no longer a boy torn between two giants. I was a man who knew what he had to do. I returned to Elara, ready to face whatever came next. It came sooner than we expected. They came at dawn. The council's guards, moving with a silent, deadly efficiency, surrounded the house where we were hiding. They didn't come for us. They came for her. She knew. As I saw the first torchlight flicker through a crack in the shutters, my heart seized. But Elara was the calmest person in the room. She turned to us, her face serene. "It is time. Remember what I have told you. Care for one another." They took her. We could only watch, powerless just as she intended. Her sacrifice was our protection. They put her on trial that same day in the central plaza, the very spot where she had first challenged them. It was a spectacle, a piece of theater designed to reassert the council's power. Caius sat on his high seat, the personification of cold, unyielding order. A tense silence gripped the crowd. "Elara of Nazareth," Caius's voice boomed across the stones. "You are charged with sedition, blasphemy against our sacred traditions, and claiming for yourself a power that is not yours to claim. What do you have to say for yourself?" Elara stood before them, a small figure flanked by hulking guards, yet she seemed to hold all the power in the square. She looked directly at Caius. "I have only spoken the truth. Has truth become a crime in this land, High Elder?" Caius sneered. "Your truth is chaos. You encourage disobedience. You speak of some other kingdom. If you have such power, then prove it. Show us this kingdom of yours. Where is it?" The entire plaza held its breath. This was the moment. And then the final, unexpected, beautiful twist unfolded. Elara smiled. It was not a smile of defiance, but of wisdom. She took her eyes off Caius. Her gaze traveled over the crowd, over the faces of fear and curiosity. and then it found mine. She held my gaze, and it felt as though she were speaking only to me. "My kingdom is not in the clouds," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It is not built of gold and stone. My kingdom is here." She slowly raised a hand, and she pointed, not to the sky, but to a woman in the crowd. "It is in the kindness of the woman who shared her last loaf of bread on the hill." Her hand moved, pointing to another man. "It is in the courage of the beggar named Seth, who found his voice after a lifetime of silence." She looked back at Caius. "It is in the hearts of the very people you rule, and it could be in yours too, High Elder, if you dared to lay down your pride and listen. It is the infinite human potential to love, to understand, and to become greater than we are. You ask who I am. You have tried to name me, a savior, a queen, a blasphemer. You are all wrong." She took a final deep breath and delivered the words that would become her legacy, the words that would echo forever. "I am not the word, I am only the echo, sent to remind you of the melody you have forgotten in yourselves." Absolute silence. No one knew how to react. Her words were not a defense, they were a revelation. She wasn't trying to save herself. She was, in her final moments, trying to save all of us by handing our power back to us. Caius, his authority completely undermined, roared, "Enough, take her away!" The guards dragged her off. But a strange thing happened. The crowd did not riot. They did not throw stones. They stood in a profound, challenging silence. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of awakening. The seed Elara had planted had finally, irrevocably taken root. They took Elara away. We never saw her again. Some say she was exiled to a distant land. Others say she perished in a dark prison. To sleep. No one knows for sure. Caius thought he had won. He thought he had silenced the threat. The story I am about to share with you belongs to the second kind. You can remove the singer, but you cannot stop the song. Elara's echo remained. It was no longer in one woman. It was in thousands. Across a land that many years have passed. The taste of hope. I have lived a long silence in the hearts of I saw the council crumble, not from the swords of men like Reese, but from its own internal rot. To look up, I saw small communities spring up, built not on rigid laws, but on the principles of sharing and empathy that Elara taught. And now I am an old man telling her story to the young, to a generation that has never known the particular darkness we endured. They ask me about Elara, about her miracles. This is not the story. And I always tell them her greatest miracle was not turning water into wine or multiplying loaves of bread. Her greatest miracle was that she looked at a lost, cynical boy like me and saw a storyteller. She didn't give us an answer. She gave us a question. What will you do with the light inside of you? And that question, to this very day, is still changing the world. If this story, if Elara's echo has reached you in some way, help us share it. Help this melody be heard a little farther. And you can do that by taking a moment to subscribe to our channel, so that each week we can sit together in the quiet and listen to the kinds of stories that have the power to wake us up. In this silence, thank you for listening.